let's unpack this. I mean, imagine sitting at your desk.
Okay.
You are staring at a project you know you absolutely need to finish.
Oh, we have all been there.
Right. You want to do it, you have to do it. The deadline is just looming over you. But instead of typing, you just sit there. You're scrolling on your phone, and you feel this bizarre, heavy physical resistance.
Yeah, like you're wading through wet concrete.
Exactly. We usually call that the universal 48-hour slump. You know, it's that moment when the initial, electric jolt of a new goal completely fizzles out.
It just vanishes.
But what if I told you that in that exact moment, you aren't actually being lazy? Your brain might literally be pulling a physical, neurological handbrake on your motor skills.
Which is wild, right? It completely reframes how we view our own productivity. I mean, we have spent decades treating procrastination and a lack of focus as these massive character flaws.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like you just aren't trying hard enough?
Exactly. But when you strip away the self-help guilt and actually look at the underlying biology, you realize it is fundamentally an emotional regulation problem. And it is playing out right there in our neural circuitry.
And that is exactly the core of our deep dive today. We are pulling from an incredibly comprehensive breakdown by Dr. Arup Giri.
It's a fantastic piece of research.
It really is. I mean, this research dives into the cognitive psychology, the evolutionary biology, and honestly, some of the most cutting-edge neuroscience of motivation versus discipline.
Yeah, we are answering the question that basically plagues all of us. Why does our brain seem to actively fight us when we try to just, sit down and do the work?
So true. And the goal here isn't to hand you another empty platitude about grinding harder or finding your inner warrior.
Right, please. No more inner warrior stuff. We are going to decode the actual mechanics of your brain's performance engine. Because once you understand the physical reality of how your brain evaluates effort and reward, you can just stop fighting yourself.
You can actually build a system that aligns with your biology rather than working against it.
Precisely.
Well, I absolutely love the idea of a performance engine. But before we get into the literal brain chemistry, we should probably define the forces we're dealing with here.
That's a good call. People throw around the words motivation and discipline like they are the exact same thing.
Yeah, they use them totally interchangeably. But Dr. Giri's research draws a very hard line between them. So the Latin root of motivation is motivus, which translates to a moving cause.
Right.
So motivation is the why. It is the emotional charge, whereas discipline is the what and the how. It's that capacity to maintain focus on a long-term gain, even when the immediate gratification just isn't there.
This really highlights why building a life solely around motivation is, well, it's a mathematical recipe for failure.
Wait, how so?
Because by definition, motivation is an emotional state, right? And emotional states are naturally transient. You just cannot sustain peak emotional arousal forever. Your nervous system simply wouldn't allow it.
Oh, that makes total sense. You'd burn out. You know, the analogy that crystallized this for me is thinking about a car.
Okay, I like car analogies.
So motivation is the spark that ignites the engine. You absolutely need it to start the process and, get moving. But discipline, that is the steady transmission.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Yeah, it keeps the wheels turning long after that initial spark has just faded into the background.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it. And for a very long time, behavioral psychology treated that spark and that transmission as separate, almost competing traits.
Like you had to be one or the other.
Exactly. You were either a motivated visionary or a disciplined worker bee. But that perspective shifted dramatically following some really fascinating sports psychology research.
Oh, right, the winter athlete study.
Yes. Gro Jordelin at the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences. She conducted a massive longitudinal study following elite winter athletes to see how these two traits actually interacted over time.
And longitudinal studies are so revealing because you get to see the messy reality of human behavior over months, not just in some quick lab test. How did she set this up?
So she tracked these high-level athletes through grueling training seasons. I mean, think about it. These are people waking up in the freezing dark to train.
Oh, man. Just the thought of that makes me want to stay in bed.
Right. She wanted to know what actually kept them going. And the findings flipped conventional wisdom completely upside down.
What did she find?
Well, in the short term, meaning period is up to about 5 weeks, she found that discipline totally eclipsed motivation. The athletes did not feel inspired. They really relied on strict, rigid routines just to show up.
Just to get out the door.
Exactly. But the profound discovery was that this disciplined consistency is what actually kept their underlying motivation alive.
So going back to the car, the transmission was keeping the engine warm even when the spark was weak.
That is exactly it. The routine protected the emotional drive. Now, when Jordan looked at the long-term data, so periods stretching beyond 10 weeks, the dynamic reversed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. High intrinsic motivation, meaning a deep internal love for the sport itself, suddenly maintaining that rigid discipline vastly easier. The habit was formed, and the joy returned to fuel it.
But didn't she also find a dark side to this? I recall there being a major difference depending on where the motivation came from.
A massive difference.
Yeah.
If the athlete's motivation was primarily extrinsic,
Meaning from the outside.
right, driven by prize money, avoiding a coach's anger, parental pressure, things like that, they experience severe willpower drain. Over time, trying to maintain discipline fueled only by external rewards led to catastrophic burnout.
Wow. So maintaining discipline becomes an exhausting cognitive burden when it isn't anchored to your own internal values.
Exactly, you just run out of gas.
So they aren't enemies at all. Motivation and discipline are like a relay team. Motivation runs the first lap, hands the baton to discipline for the long middle stretch, and then, if the goal is meaningful to you, intrinsic motivation takes the baton back for the final sprint.
That's a great summary of the behavioral model, yeah.
Yeah.
But if that is the psychological behavioral model, I really want to know what this relay race actually looks like inside the skull. Like, how does the brain process this physically?
Okay, to understand the physical mechanics of motivation, we have to look closely at dopamine. And honestly, we need to take a moment to shatter a very pervasive myth here.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Probably. I mean, if you spend 5 minutes online, you will hear people talking about getting a dopamine hit from eating chocolate or watching a funny video.
Yeah, associating it entirely with pleasure.
Right. But dopamine is not the pleasure molecule.
That completely blew my mind in the research. We hear that phrase constantly. Dopamine hit, dopamine detox.
Yeah.
If it isn't pleasure, what is it actually doing when we eat that chocolate?
So landmark neurobiology studies, particularly those by researchers like Kent Berridge, have proven that dopamine does not mediate liking. Liking is the passive sensory pleasure you feel while consuming a reward.
Okay.
Dopamine, instead, mediates wanting. It is the chemical of anticipation, incentive, and drive.
Wait, wanting.
Yeah. When your brain anticipates a reward, a deep subcortical pathway fires off dopamine, creating a physical, energizing state that drives you to get up and seek that reward. It is the craving, not the satisfaction.
Oh, wow. And this connects directly to a concept that explains so much of our daily frustration, right?
Right.
Reward prediction error, or RPE.
Yes, RPE is huge here.
As I understand it, your brain doesn't just release dopamine randomly. It acts like a highly strategic betting system. It constantly calculates the difference between the reward you expect to get from an action and the reward you actually get.
That is the core engine of habit formation. So let's say you try a brand new productivity app or a new workout routine and you feel surprisingly good afterward, better than you anticipated.
Yeah.
You experience a positive reward prediction error. The outcome exceeded the expectation. As a result, your brain floods your system with dopamine to ensure you remember that action and repeat it.
Which perfectly explains why novelty is so intoxicating.
Yes.
Like, the first 3 times you go to a new gym, the positive RPE is off the charts. You feel amazing. But as you keep going, the routine becomes a habit. The reward becomes completely expected.
Yep, and then what happens?
The prediction error drops to 0, and suddenly the dopamine dries up, the novelty is gone, and you hit that 48-hour slump where you just want to quit.
You nailed it. And this brings us to one of the most vital discoveries in recent neuroscience. That sudden urge to quit isn't just an absence of dopamine. It isn't just your brain running out of fuel.
Wait, it's not.
No, it is an active defensive mechanism. In 2026, a team led by neuroscientist Kenichi Emamori at Kyoto University identified a neural pathway in primates that they officially termed the motivation brake.
I cannot get over the phrase motivation break.
Yeah.
It paints such a clear picture. What is actually happening in the primate brain when this engages?
So deep in the brain, there is a region acting as a sophisticated cost-benefit detector. It constantly scans your environment and your internal state for emotional or physical costs.
Like what kind of costs?
Well, if a task feels aversive, maybe it requires painful effort, maybe it carries a risk of social failure, or maybe it is just excruciatingly boring.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. When that happens, this detector region lights up. And here is the crucial part. It sends a direct signal to actively suppress the motor action centers of the brain.
Wait, seriously? The brain is actively turning off its own ability to move.
Yes. It translates the emotional friction of a task into physical suppression. When this region senses an unpleasant task, it dampens your motor center. It functions exactly like a parking brake in a car.
Wait, I really want to pause on this.
Yeah.
So when you are putting off doing your taxes or avoiding a difficult conversation and you feel stuck on the couch, it isn't a moral failure.
Not at all.
You aren't just lacking character. Your brain is literally electrically pulling a handbrake on your motor skills because it is afraid of the perceived cost of the task.
Biologically speaking, yes. Procrastination is deeply misunderstood. I mean, it is fundamentally an emotional regulation problem that manifests as physical paralysis.
That is insane.
The brain perceives the boredom or frustration of the taxes as a threat, and it freezes your action pathways to protect you from that perceived negative state.
Okay, but if these older subcortical parts of our brain are constantly throwing the brake on us, how does our higher level logic fight back? Like, how does the prefrontal cortex, which knows we need to do our taxes to avoid going to jail, overpower that brake without just exhausting itself?
That is the million-dollar question. And to answer that, we have to dismantle another massive scientific myth that has permeated pop culture, the theory of ego depletion.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah, for decades, psychology was dominated by Roy Baumeister's idea that willpower was a depletable physical fuel, very much like the gas in your car. The theory argued that every time you resisted a cookie or forced yourself to work, you burned some of this willpower fuel.
Right, the idea of decision fatigue.
Yeah.
We've all heard that you should wear the same outfit every day like Steve Jobs so you don't use up your daily willpower on minor choices.
Right, it sounds incredibly logical, and it felt true to our lived experience. But modern cognitive neuroscience has thoroughly dismantled it. Willpower is not a physical substance that runs out.
So when I'm exhausted at the end of the day, what's going on?
The fatigue you feel at 4 p.m. on a Friday isn't your brain running empty on glucose or, magic discipline juice.
Instead, it comes down to what Dr. Giri calls the opportunity cost model, which I find fascinating. There's a region in the brain, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, that acts like a very cynical, highly critical internal accountant.
The internal accountant is the perfect metaphor for the DSCC. Its entire job is efficiency.
This accountant just sits up in your prefrontal cortex, constantly running the numbers. It weighs the mental energy required for whatever task you are doing against the subjective value of the long-term goal.
Exactly.
It is essentially asking, is pushing through this boring spreadsheet really worth more than the guaranteed immediate dopamine we could get from resting or opening social media?
And when the accountant decides the math doesn't favor the spreadsheet, it doesn't shut down your muscles. It generates a powerful feeling of subjective fatigue.
It literally manufactures the sensation of exhaustion to convince you to switch to a more immediately rewarding task.
Yes. You aren't out of energy. Your brain is just trying to reallocate the energy it has.
Okay, so how do highly disciplined people overcome this? They obviously get their work done.
Well, they don't do it by fighting the internal accountant with sheer willpower. I mean, trying to brute force your way past that manufactured fatigue is a losing game. Instead, disciplined people use two very distinct neural mechanisms to bypass the conflict entirely.
Let's get into those.
The first is value-based choice.
This is where we talk about how the brain translates abstract ideas into a currency you can actually understand. Right?
Precisely. A specific part of your prefrontal cortex acts as a universal conversion scale. It takes qualitative concepts like being healthy, financial freedom, or immediate comfort, and converts all of them into a single metric called subjective value.
Okay, so making them comparable.
Right. When you make an autonomous choice, meaning when you engage in a difficult task because it deeply aligns with your core identity and values, this region massively amplifies the subjective value of the hard work.
Oh, we see.
It tilts the internal accountant's ledger in your favor, which dramatically reduces the feeling of neural friction.
So the effort literally feels less exhausting because your brain values the outcome higher.
Yeah.
But if you're doing something out of pure obligation, the value is low and the friction is agonizing.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And the second mechanism, the highly disciplined use, is habit automation.
Automation is the ultimate bypass. Once you repeat a behavior enough times in the same context, your brain recognizes a pattern. It realizes it doesn't need to waste heavy cognitive processing power on this decision anymore.
It just puts it on autopilot.
Yep. It physically shifts the control of that behavior away from the conscious prefrontal networks down into the deeper subconscious structures like the basal ganglia.
So the internal accountant doesn't even get the chance to audit the task because it has become an automatic subconscious routine.
Precisely.
It's brilliant.
Right.
So we know about the motivation break and we know about the internal accountant. The ultimate question is, how do we actively manipulate them? How do we hack this machinery to actually get our work done today?
And this is where the theoretical neuroscience turns into incredibly practical psychology. There was a groundbreaking study published by psychologist Sue Tao in Frontiers in Psychology.
Oh, this study is so cool.
It really is. Her research team asked a very provocative question. If we can satisfy the brain's deep psychological need for autonomy and competence just by feeling a subjective sense of self-discipline, would that trigger an immediate surge in autonomous motivation?
And the way they tested this is just so elegant. They brought participants into the lab and used an intervention called recall priming.
Right.
It sounds complex, but it was really just having people spend a few minutes actively remembering and writing down a specific past experience where they successfully used self-discipline to overcome a challenge.
A remarkably simple, low-effort psychological intervention.
But the behavioral change was wild. The people who spent just 2 minutes remembering a past win experienced a massive, measurable boost in autonomous motivation.
Yes.
The researchers handed them a stack of difficult, tedious translation tasks. The recall group completely bypassed procrastination. They dove in and tackled the absolute hardest tasks first.
Which is not what humans normally do.
Not at all. Meanwhile, the control group, who were asked to think about neutral, unrelated memories, immediately slammed on their internal motivation brakes and procrastinated by doing the easiest stuff they could find.
It implies that our sense of capability is highly malleable. Believing you are a disciplined person in the present moment makes your brain actually want to take action.
That's empowering.
You don't have to wait for the universe to grant you a feeling of motivation. You can strategically prime your own neural pathways.
Okay, I want to bring all of this dense science down to the ground for you listening.
Yeah.
Based on Dr. Giri's breakdown, there are several evidence-based strategies for success.
Let's go through them.
Instead of just listing them out like a table of contents, let's group them into actionable themes and connect them directly back to the biology we've uncovered. Let's start with the most urgent problem. How do we loosen that motivation brake when we are completely stuck?
The most immediate tool for loosening the brake is behavioral activation. This is a foundational principle in modern therapy, honestly. Action must precede motivation.
We always get that backward.
Always.
Yeah.
We often wait to feel inspired before we start. But biologically, taking even a laughably tiny micro step, like just opening a blank document and writing one sentence, triggers an unexpected outcome.
Positive RPE.
Exactly. It creates a micro-positive reward prediction error, which causes a small dopamine release, which physically loosens the brake's grip on your motor center.
You essentially trick the cost-benefit detector by making the initial cost almost zero. Another way to hack that system is temptation bundling. This is all about leveraging anticipatory dopamine. You take a task that the internal accountant hates, like doing the dishes or organizing your inbox, and you strictly pair it with something you genuinely love.
Oh, I do this all the time.
Me too. You only let yourself drink your favorite expensive coffee or listen to this deep dive while doing that dreaded task. The positive anticipation of the reward actually helps release the motor pathways from paralysis.
Moving to a second theme, we have to look at how we structure our environment to bypass the internal accountant entirely. One powerful method is using implementation intentions.
Which is a fancy term for if-then planning.
Exactly. Vague goals like, I will study more this week, require massive processing power from your prefrontal cortex every single day.
The accountant hates that.
The accountant rejects it. But if you make a rigid rule, like if it is 6 p.m. on Tuesday, but I will sit at my desk for 1 hour, you tie the action to a specific environmental cue.
It offloads the decision-making from the conscious brain to the environment.
Yep.
And speaking of the environment, lowering your perceived activation energy is critical. Since the brake is hypersensitive to physical and emotional costs, you have to ruthlessly eliminate friction.
Make it easy.
Exactly. Lay out your workout clothes the night before. Leave your book on your pillow. Close all the distracting tabs on your browser at the end of the workday. The lower the barrier to entry, the less the brain fears the energy cost of starting.
Finally, we have to address the emotional layer of discipline. Remember, the motivation brake is triggered by negative emotional friction. This is why practicing self-compassion is a neurological necessity, not just a feel-good buzzword.
That is so important to emphasize.
When you fail at a goal and mercilessly beat yourself up, you generate intense negative emotional distress.
Which is completely counterintuitive to how most of us were raised. We think the guilt is necessary to force us to do better next time.
I know, but neurologically, that guilt and distress trigger the cost detector to freeze the motor pathways even harder the next time you try. Self-compassion lowers the emotional threat level, keeping the brake released so you can actually attempt the task again.
Wow.
Similarly, you must change how you frame your obligations. Never tell yourself, I have to do this. Coercion instantly drains cognitive resources.
It's the value-based choice we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
When you reframe it autonomously, like, I want to do this because it aligns with my personal growth, you activate the conversion scale in your brain. You make the effort feel lighter.
And if all else fails, use social commitment. We are profoundly social creatures. Sharing your goals or simply working quietly in the same room as someone else provides an external scaffolding.
Body doubling, they call it.
Right. When your internal accountant wants to quit, the social structure holds you in place.
The overarching theme here is intelligent design. It is about crafting an environment and an internal dialogue that supports the brain's natural algorithms, rather than constantly trying to fight a biological war against your own nervous system.
Well said.
It changes everything. We started this deep dive exploring the frustration of the 48-hour slump. What the research clearly shows is that motivation and discipline are not enemies, and they aren't magic traits you are either born with or lack.
No, they are biological processes.
Motivation is that beautiful emotional spark that shows you what is possible. It gets the engine firing. But discipline is the devoted self-respect, the steady transmission that actually builds the life you want. Use motivation to set your direction, but build systems and rely on discipline to carry you through the journey.
And if we pull all the way back and look at the bigger picture of this neuroscience, it raises a deeply provocative question.
Oh, lay it on me.
If our willpower is largely just an internal accountant weighing chemical opportunity costs, and our procrastination is merely a physical break triggered by emotional friction in our surroundings,
Yeah.
to what extent do we actually possess free will in our daily productivity? Or are we, in many ways, simply the sum of our perfectly or poorly designed environmental cues?
Wow. That is a profound thought to chew on. Are we the driver, or are we just reacting to the track we built? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the performance engine of the brain. I want to leave you with a challenge. Take just one of the concepts we discussed today, whether it's using a 2-minute recall to prime your confidence or simply laying out your clothes to lower the activation energy, and test it out on your own brain tomorrow morning. See how the engine responds. Until next time, keep the spark alive, but trust the transmission.